Welcome to Figure Feedback. My name is Jeremy, and this is the Hypermaker Resin 3D printer from a company called Emake 3D. So if you find yourself interested in this printer, they currently have it on offer via Kickstarter. It's already been funded, and the early bird special pricing for this printer is $1,499. So if you find yourself interested in it, go ahead, check the link in the description. It'll take you over there, and then you'll be able to learn more about it. But here, I'm going to tell you what my experience has been like using this printer from the day it rolled in up until right now. All right, so first, let's just go over some quick specifications. I know that those are important, but I'm not going to hold you too long on those. And I just got it up here right on my phone so that we know everything right up front. All right, so the build volume for this printer is 211.68 by 118.37 by 200 millimeters. It has an XY resolution of 14 by 19 microns. It has a zoned UV light feature, which means that when you're resin 3D printing, instead of the entire screen lighting up, it's only going to light up the portions for that layer that's being cured, and then it'll cure that layer, it'll move up, and then the next layer is going to be lit up on the screen. So the entire screen is not going to be lit up, and that should help for that screen to have a little bit more longevity in its life. This printer also has a built-in heater. It has a resin mixer. It has a camera that you can tap into for remote monitoring. And it also has an automatic resin feeding system that has a special cap that you can attach to one of their resin bottles and stick it in there. And then it'll just feed the resin via gravity into the reservoir. And then when it's lost some of its resin, it'll just naturally start filling it back up again. All right, so those are some basic specs for this printer. Now, let me tell you what the experience was like when this first came to my house. Now, they shipped this thing pretty well protected. It was surrounded by wooden planks that I needed to get off before I can access the printer. And then at the bottom of the printer, it had some screws that were screwed into the wooden planks that was a part of the packaging. So they really made sure that this thing wasn't going to be moving about in transit. But despite those best efforts, at some point between China and here, this unfortunately happened to this printer. So as you can see, the poor lid here is completely cracked and it is broken. And I also have some cracks along the side of this printer as well. I still have the very big piece that I can just kind of put right there and maybe even just like glue it or epoxy it on. But I did want to still show you this and let you know what the printing experience was like despite this lid being cracked like this. All right. But the packaging that it came in was really well done, and I'm surprised that this managed to happen, but hey, you know, mistakes happen, right? So anyway, after I got everything removed and separated from the packaging, I had to put it on this table, and I'm going to tell you up front, this is the heaviest resin 3D printer that I have ever tried. In fact, it is probably the heaviest printer that I have ever tried to lift, coming up to like the Bambu Lab H2D. I'm not sure which one was heavier. Bambu Lab is bigger, definitely, but this printer is built solid. It is so heavy. So be careful with this thing, all right? The construction, despite this lid, which is plastic and prone to breaking, but everything else is just so well made. And they say that this is an industrial 3D printer. They mention using it for like dentistry and for printing with some jewelry type of resins, stuff like that, so you can make end products with it. And they really took that quite seriously. This vat here, it's all metal. It is the heaviest resin vat that I have ever had my hands on. This build plate here is also just metal. This latch here is what frees it up. I'm wearing gloves because I've been using this. It's covered with, resin. It's all contaminated. So, safety first. But here's the build plate that you can just kind of shimmy off right here. You see that it has all these holes in it, and it is also curved right here. And the curvature is great because when this is done printing and the z-axis raises up to the top, because this is slanted on top, that resin has an ability to not only, go through the holes, but also go over the sides. So you don't have a bunch of resin sitting on the top of the plate that you either have to manually tilt in order to get those drips back into the vat, or just be content with wasting it when you sit this down on the table. If you let it just hang up there for a little while, it will drip everything off for itself, and then you can put everything back on and just clamp it right back down, and it is nice and it is solid. The other thing with this printer is that it has a resin mixer. Now that's something that I hadn't seen too often up until maybe about the Formlabs Form 4 3D printer that also has a resin mixer, which means after every layer, the z-axis will move up just high enough so that this resin mixer can move across the vat just like that. And by doing that, it helps to keep the resin mixed. It helps to keep it from getting too gloopy. It keeps the viscosity pretty low. It also helps to keep the pigments of the resin from separating, so it just keeps everything nice and just mixed together. And this is a completely separate piece that you have to put on here. You have to assemble it. It's really quite easy, but then you put it in here, you lock it down, and then the motors will just take care of itself. The way that the vat is removed from this printer is similar, but at the same time, kind of different. It's got these thumb screws that we're all familiar with that you just simply twist until they come loose, and then normally you'll be able to pull up the vat. But you're not going to be able to pull up the vat until you remove this resin mixer. And after you remove the resin mixer, then you'll be able to take these screws, and they don't come out. Instead, they're on a hinge. So they just sort of fold and hinge out of the way. Then you can remove the resin vat. Then when you're done, you slide everything back on, you put it right back into its respective place, and then you just tighten it down again. So if you're ever worried about possibly losing the screws to the resin vat, that's not going to happen because you cannot take them out, and they just fold up out of the way. Now, for this particular printer, I do have to let you know that they tell me that mostly everything is going to be the same from this printer to the ones that they ship out to people who back this, but there could be some slight changes here and there. So while it may not be exactly one-to-one, it should be at least 95% the same that I'm showing you here compared to what you would get if you were to buy it. Now, let me tell you something about this particular resin mixer. Now, I said that it was fairly easy to assemble, but at the same time, it's in there really tight and it's somewhat hard to remove. It's one of those things that I hope that they address before shipping this out. But if they don't know, I'm letting them know now, because this is so well placed in here. Like, this part right here is a separate piece, and this part down below is a separate piece. You basically have to just put the two together and then just latch it shut. But the problem is, when you want to take out the vat, let's say you wanted to change resin, let's say that you wanted to clean things or whatever the case may be, when you take this out, you have to pull it up with a good amount of force. And that kind of force is enough to make this resin mixer just pull out pretty quickly, and it's covered with resin, so it can cause resin to fly. It could fly up and hit you in the face possibly. So you got to be really careful. At least I have to be really careful when I'm taking this out and just kind of shimmy it, rock it back and forth so it can get loose and I can take this out, as opposed to just yanking it out, because that's going to cause resin to fly. So that's something that I definitely do hope is addressed with this particular printer. These two end pieces here are actually magnetic. I thought that was pretty interesting. And so that's why they connect to the vat. There's little magnets in here, and then the resin mixer just kind of nicely sits right there inside of the slot in which it opens up. Now, the printer also has a camera in it. And honestly, when I'm looking at this, I still don't quite know exactly where the camera is, but it's here somewhere. It's actually, it's blended quite well with everything that's on the inside. And the cool thing about the camera is that you don't need a separate app in order to use the camera. All you have to do is type in the IP address of the printer once you have it connected to your Wi-Fi. You connect it to your Wi-Fi, then you type in the IP address into your web browser, and it's going to bring up this web-based interface that allows you to see the camera feed, and it also gives you control over the printer. You'll be able to monitor it. You'll be able to change like temperatures, the VAT temperatures and things like that if you want to do that. So I think that's a very low friction way for you to be able to have some kind of control over the printer without relying on a separate third-party application or something like that. So just simply being able to use the IP address in order to communicate with the printer, that is amazing. I love that. I wish more companies actually did that. Now, as far as heating the vat goes, the user interface, it allows you to turn on that heater just with the simple touch. It is a touch screen. And once you start heating up the resin, it's going to come to a certain temperature, and then the printer will start to go down on the z-axis so it can start the print. Or once you reach the temperature that you want, you can just turn the heater off manually, and then that will also cause the printing to start. And then you can just turn it back on whenever you want. By default, it wants to heat up to like 34 degrees Celsius, but inside the app, you do have some kind of control over that. So the heating function is built in. You don't have to buy anything extra. That is great. It also has two USB ports on the side, and you can use that to transfer files. They gave me a Qi2 box profile to use, so I've been using Qi2 box with this particular printer. You can transfer your files from the USB directly to the printer's internal storage, and then you can copy from the USB to the printer, and then you can start printing. The power button is located on the back. That's where the exhaust is for the fan, as well as the power plug. And then if you look over on this side, there is absolutely nothing there. It is completely clean. And then over on the front of the printer, there is also nothing there except for the touchscreen and the user interface. So here's a look at the user interface here. And basically you can see the temperature of the resin right there on the left side. This is also where you'll be able to monitor your print progress if a print was actually going on. Your pause, play, and stop controls are all right there. And you can also turn the vat on and off, the heating function rather, just by tapping that button right there. That's where you can also access your Wi-Fi controls and things like that. This little icon here that looks like a piece of paper is where you can see some of the things that you have already stored on the printer. And then you can also move over to the USB stick for files that may be loaded on there, and you can import them so that you can print them. The touchscreen is fairly responsive, but sometimes, especially when it comes to like the corners, I do have to press it more than once just to kind of get it to register. But then here on this page, we got the print page that we just saw, the model files. Over here is exposure, where you can use this to test the different exposure patterns that'll be on the screen just to make sure that it's working okay. We have table correction, which is just for like leveling. Parameter settings is where you can change aspects, the printing aspects of the particular model. And you can actually do this while the printer is printing. So if you wanted to change anything like the exposure times or any of the speeds, you can do that right here independently from the slicer. And then you have your miscellaneous settings, which is going to bring up vat cleaning for if you have a failed print, you got to get the residue off of the vat. That's what you use that for. Over the air updates, I have not gotten any yet. Reset everything, your machine info, and then just return back to the main screen here. But most of the time, you're going to be right here on this print screen. The screen quality is fine, you know, it's really no big deal. It's clear. You can see everything just fine. But yeah, that is what the UI is like. And it's fairly easy to understand. But since it is new, you are going to have to sort of get used to it. But once you do, you'll find that it's not difficult to follow along with at all. All right, so let's take a look at some figures. All of these sliced in Chi2 box, and we can start with this big guy here, just so that you can get a sense of the detail that you can get with this printer. Now, it does produce some very nice miniatures. I cannot argue with that. I think that this golem guy definitely came out looking really good here. And, you know, and that's just the thing with resin 3D printers these days. You know, it's kind of hard to get a modern day resin 3D printer that doesn't make models that look good. You know, that's actually pretty difficult to do. So as we can just kind of look at these guys from all angles, you definitely see that, yeah, it does do a good job of making these guys. Fortunately, I had not had any failures at all while printing these miniatures, and using the supports from Chi2 box. You know, they were easy enough to remove. Not too much fuss with these guys at all. And, you know, you can just see how little these are. I mean, these are like 32mm scale minis. And yeah, it gets the job done. So, you know, detail is not something that you should worry about. And of course, the amount of detail that you get and everything, it can depend on the settings that you use for your exposure times and all of that good stuff. That's just something that just goes along with resin 3D printing. But here's another little example right here of this guy. And what's cool about him is we get to test some of the dimensional accuracy that the printer is able to produce. So right here in the front, there's actually this other piece that is for like basically effects. So I can just stick that down right in there, and you can see just how flush this part here was able to go into that little crevice there. It sits nice and flush with it. No gaps, no weirdness. So that dimensional accuracy, I think that was a very nice test of it right there. And it just worked out perfectly. So I can just glue that in place. And this model will be pretty much complete as soon as I get the base up for it. And for something bigger, here is Professor X's head. This is part of a bust from Wicked. And I printed this head all in one piece on the Hypermaker. And just here's a look at this all the way around. Now, this head was pretty challenging because the way that the supports were that were printed, they were going up and through like these wires here. But it still managed to get around those, and I took them off and I didn't break anything. So that's great. And again, just looking at the detail on the top of the head, it has like all these little markings and just little notches here and there. No finishing work done on him at all. No sanding, no priming, no nothing. This is just how it looks raw out of the printer. Here's the underside of him. That's where you see where some of the supports were right there. You can kind of see like the little support nubs right there. That's something that you would eventually just file down. But, you know, all in all, I think old Professor X's head here came out looking pretty good indeed. So, you know, the printer's capabilities are definitely there. So you don't have to worry about whether or not it can do a good job at printing. At this point, it's just all up to the resin that you're using and the settings that you use in order to get the results that you want. All right, so I've been doing a lot of yapping. So let me just give you a rundown of some pros and cons, and then I'll wrap it up. Now, the most important thing, I think, with any printer is going to be the end result, the actual prints that you get off of it, regardless of any bells and whistles that the machine may have. If it doesn't produce some good models at the end, then it's really not worth it. But these models that I printed on here came out very well, and the parts that needed to be glued together and fit together, they also fit together very well. This printer is being marketed as being industrial, and is certainly heavy enough to be considered that. And it can also print some more specialty resins like dentistry resins or ceramic resins and jewelry making resins, things like that. So from that standpoint, if that carries over from what I've experienced from just printing with the resin that I use, then that is a great thing. It's nice, it's accurate, you're going to get some good results for your end products. But if I can nitpick about some cons, one of them is going to be the fact that there's no pour spout on the vat. Pour spouts are very helpful, but this doesn't have it. I also haven't been able to find, at least not easily, a maximum fill line on this vat. So I don't know how much resin I should or shouldn't put in here before things start to overflow, or if I already have resin in there and I want to get an idea of if I have enough resin to complete a model. I don't really know because there's no indicator there. And I think those indicators should be there. Another con about this is it's loud. The fan really just wants to stay on all the time. And while being, not the quietest thing in the room is not uncommon for any resin 3D printer, I just wish that it would quiet down when there's no print being done, so just ramp those RPMs down a little bit just to make it a little more pleasant to be around when you are around the printer. Another thing that has to do with noise is the resin scraper. As it moves almost to the very end of the vat, it tends to get louder as it does that. Some sort of like kind of a high frequency, almost like a scraping noise as it's reaching the end. And it's loud enough for me to hear inside the house, even upstairs. It kind of just let me know that, yep, the printer is still going. So I wish that that were quieter. But overall, this machine is really solid and I like it. But I think that the biggest hurdle that is going to have to face is definitely the price. And that's also the biggest con. For $1,500 right now going on Kickstarter, that is going to be a hard sell, I think, for people who are looking for a resin 3D printer to do things such as printing models, miniatures, things that are more like cosmetic in nature, things that you can print up, stuff like that. It's going to be a harder sell for those types of people because there are so many other resin 3D printers that do an excellent job of doing those same things, but they cost a lot less than this does. And although this printer, I'm sure, is built better than many of those, because like I said, it's very, very heavy. And that's why I have this sheet under it, because it makes it easier for me to move it because it's so freaking tanky. At the end of the day, when you compare the modern printers that you have today and their prices versus this one for the $1,500, then it really becomes a harder sell. So you're really going to have to want this for using like those ceramic or dentistry resins and doing some resin 3D printing in possibly more commercial or more monetized way, instead of just something for just a hobby machine. That way you can get some more life and get some more justification out of that price tag. And even though my lid came broken, I was happy to see that the printer still did what it was supposed to do. And I was still able to print things without having any failures at all. So, it's unfortunate that that happened, but I was still able to do it, even with the lid down. But if something like this were to happen to you, you just have to be a little bit more careful about where you place it, just in case some stray sunlight comes into the room. And if it can get into this opening and up and around the vat, then it could cure the resin inside of the vat. But just in my experience, I was able to keep the heat in there, keep the heat at a good temperature. Like I said, at around 33-ish degrees Celsius by default. So I didn't have any problems with that despite the cracked lid. So yeah, that is going to do it for this printer. I am going to leave a link to the Kickstarter. If you're interested, you can check it out, get some more information about it. And it works very well. And I do like the camera and the way that you can monitor it just by typing in the IP address. The biggest hurdle, for sure, is going to be that price. So thank you all so much for watching. Till next time, take care of yourselves, and I'll speak to you soon.